Good morning. I hope everybody's having a happy Labor Day weekend. Labor Day is a holiday that actually celebrates work. I find this a bit paradoxical. Holidays and work to me seem to be at opposite ends of the spectrum. Think about it. Normally when we celebrate a holiday, we get away from work. Work is usually the last thing on our minds. After all, the holiday is a time where we can actually go and relax and sort of rejuvenate. And it's not a time usually when we think of work, but Labor Day is just the opposite of that. And Labor Day is a time when we're actually supposed to think about work. We're actually supposed to celebrate the fact that we have a job. I wonder how many people actually think about that on Labor Day. According to the Bible, labor or work is certainly something worthy to celebrate. Work was really, I guess you could say, God's idea. God put Adam and Eve in the garden to work it. In other words, they had a job to take care of the garden. That was their responsibility. And I believe part of what it means to be created in God's image, at least part of that, refers to having the potential to reflect God's character traits. And one of His character traits is work. Our God has a great work ethic. Think about it. He created the world in 6 days, created everything. And then, did He go on vacation and just stop working? Did God just sort of kick back in the celestial recliner and put His hands behind His head and said, I've created everything now I'm just going to take it easy for all eternity? Well, I hope that's not your impression of God. Listen to what Jesus says in John chapter 5, verse 17. He says, "My Father is always at work to this very day, and I too am working." And also keep in mind, Paul tells us in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 1, to be imitators of God. So if we're going to really imitate God, part of that would involve labor. Furthermore, listen to what the Apostle Paul writes in 1 Thessalonians 4:11. He says, "Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, to mind your own business, and work with your hands, just as we told you, so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders, and so that you will not be dependent on anybody." Not only does he tell us that we as Christians are supposed to work, but he gives us a couple of good practical reasons why we need to work. First, we should work so we can win the respect of outsiders. Who are the outsiders? Well, those are the people who are outside the church. People that we might call unchurched, or people that we might call unsaved. Even unsaved people respect people with a good work ethic. Imagine that. How we approach our work could determine where someone spends eternity. That's heavy. Now, if we're lazy, we can turn people off who need to be turned on to Jesus Christ. Second, we should work so that we will not be dependent on others. That's what the apostle tells us. We have no right to freeload off the labor of other people. So God wants us to work because it enhances our Christian witness and it keeps us from being dependent upon others. In fact, we will have something to contribute back to those who are in need if we work responsibly. So as you can see, biblically, work is not something to get out of, it's something to get into, and Labor Day is a holiday to remind us of the importance of work. Really, being a good worker is part of what it means to live skillfully. And that's what I've entitled this sermon series in the book of Proverbs. If you've been here for the last several weeks, we've been moving through the book of Proverbs topically, and part of what it means to be wise in the eyes of God is to live skillfully. And the book of Proverbs tells us how to live skillfully. And so far we've taken a look at the importance of fearing God, which is really the theme of the entire book. The beginning of wisdom, it starts with the fear of God. So far in the series we've taken a look at some personality traits that teach us what not to do when it comes to skillful living. We've taken a look at the simple. We've taken a look at the mocker. We've taken a look at the fool. We've taken a look at the adulterer and the adulteress. And today, Since it's Labor Day, we're going to take a look at the sluggard. Again, as with the others in this series, the sluggard teaches us what not to do when it comes to labor. In fact, I've entitled today's message, Allergic to Labor. And that gives you a good idea of what a sluggard is all about. You see, a sluggard is basically a person that's kind of sluggish. A sluggard is someone who is essentially a lazy person. And today we're going to look at the various ways the sluggard is described in the book of Proverbs. And we're going to find that he is certainly someone we do not want to emulate. Remember, God is a worker. He's always working, and He expects His people to imitate Him and be workers. But when we come to the sluggard, we find that he's at the opposite end of the working spectrum. So let's take a look at the characteristics of a sluggard. First characteristic, you might have suspected this, the sluggard sleeps too much. Proverbs chapter 6 verse 9 asks, "How long will you lie there, you sluggard? When will you get up from your sleep?" That's not a compliment. Along these same lines, Proverbs 26:14 states, "As a door turns on its hinges, so a sluggard turns on his bed." The idea is the sluggard just stays in bed way too much. You get the idea that the sluggard is that guy that just keeps hitting snooze and hitting snooze and hitting snooze. How many of y'all hit? No, you don't have to tell me. Hit the snooze this morning over and over. You know, that's a sluggard, man. He's just always hitting the snooze. He doesn't want to get up. Seriously, sleeping is something we all need. We all need to rest. We all need to recharge. And from what I understand, most people need between 8 and 10 hours of sleep. Now, I know as soon as I say that, somebody will come and say, "I can get by on 5, preacher." Maybe you can, but it seems like most people, to be healthy, need somewhere between 8 and 10 hours of sleep. But if you're a physically healthy person, and you are in the habit of sleeping 12 or more hours in a 24-hour period, I believe it's safe to say that you at the very least have some sluggard tendencies. And at very worst, you might just be a sluggard. Now, please don't misunderstand me here. Notice I said if you are physically healthy. Some people are not physically healthy. Some people may require more rest and sleep. But, if you're sleeping over 12 hours in a 24-hour day period, and you're healthy, probably got some issues with being a sluggard. Now, keep in mind, God does believe in rest. We find the resting, I call it the 1 day in 7 principle in the Bible. God Himself set this example for us by resting on the 7th day, after the 6 days of creation. What did He do? He did rest. Scripture does teach that. Genesis chapter 2, verse 2. Jesus also tells us in Mark chapter 2, verse 27, that the Sabbath, that day of rest, was made for man. In other words, we need at least 1 day in 7 to rest and again recharge and get rejuvenated so that we can take on the next week. It's important that we get our rest, but we're not supposed to lay around all 7 days. That would be being a sluggard. Second characteristic we find when it comes to the sluggard is he doesn't finish what he starts. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 27 says, "The lazy man does not roast his game." Now, we're going to look at a couple of verses here, and I think they're hyperbolic. I think they're a little bit exaggerated for the sake of emphasis. But the idea is the sluggard, gets his gear together, and he goes out, and he goes hunting, and he brings home the game, but he just can't get around to cooking it. It just gets wasted. Maybe he engages in some procrastination, whatever. He just never gets around to cooking his game. That's one of the characteristics you'll find in Proverbs. Sluggards tend to be destructive and even wasteful. Proverbs 26:15, in pathetic humor, puts it this way: "The sluggard buries his hand in the dish, and he is too lazy to bring it back to his mouth." Now, that's an exaggeration, wouldn't you say? The food gets on the fork but never reaches the mouth. I've never met anybody that lazy, have you? They can't get the fork up to their mouth. That's obviously hyperbolic, but it paints a vivid picture of someone who just can't finish what he starts, whether it be food or projects or whatever. It might be tasks at work, might be homework, might be a term paper. It might be some other assignment, jobs around the house. The sluggard just can't seem to finish what he starts. Third, and closely related to this characteristic of the sluggard, is this: he doesn't maintain his property. I'm getting on my own toes a little here, but I'll save that. In the book of Proverbs, Solomon mentions how he's walking along the road and he passes the sluggard's property, and he takes notice of the condition of the sluggard's property. You get the idea that he doesn't really know the person that lives there, but he looks at that property and he realizes, hey, a sluggard must live there. Proverbs 24:31 states, thorns had come up everywhere. The ground was covered with weeds, and the stone wall was in ruins. You know, sometimes when I'm walking, maybe around the neighborhood, or maybe sometimes passing out flyers or door hangers from the church or whatever, I pass all kinds of properties, and I see the condition of various ones, and I particularly think of one that I came across and sticks out in my mind. The ground was covered in weeds, and then where there weren't weeds, there was leaves everywhere. It looked like the ground hadn't been raked in years. And not only that, there was big, giant limbs all over the yard. Some old oak trees, there's just limbs everywhere. So we had weeds and leaves and limbs. And I couldn't help but wonder if maybe a sluggard lived at that house. And I would say he probably did. Probably a sluggard lives there. The modern day sluggard, just like the one in Scripture, does not maintain his property. He doesn't keep his house painted. Maybe he doesn't keep his shingles up. His yard's got weeds everywhere. Maybe when it comes to his vehicle, he doesn't keep the tires rotated and doesn't keep the oil changed. Just doesn't maintain the very things that the Lord has entrusted him to take care of. Now, why is that the case? I'm not sure. I suspect it's procrastination. He may intend to get around to it. The guy that Solomon's talking about here, he may intend to weed the vineyard. He may intend to repair the stone wall. He may intend to finish the job, but he just doesn't ever get around to it. He can't get motivated. Procrastination does seem to have a relationship with being a sluggard. You just keep putting it off. We may put things off by distracting ourselves. I've caught myself doing that before. All kinds of things. I'd say there's something all of us don't like to do, right? I mean, I would say there's something, let's just say at your house, there is just something you don't like to do. One of the things I didn't like to do, several years ago we don't have it now, and I'm glad we don't have it now, it's a garbage disposal. We had a garbage disposal, and that thing was always getting stopped up, and all kind of things would get down in there. Maybe a spoon or a fork, get down in there, all kinds of stuff. And you know what? You have to reach down in there, and it's nasty down in there. And I don't like to get out all in that nasty garbage disposal. It's just garbage kind of. It's worse than garbage to me. It's all wet and damp and gooey and stinky. You ever stuck your hand down in there? You better unplug it or turn it off if you do that. But anyway, ours was broken for a long time, and I kept putting it off. Wendy kept getting after me about it, putting it off. And finally, she said, I want it for a Christmas present, And finally, guess when I did it? Around midnight on Christmas Eve, I finally got around to it. Because I didn't want to do it. I just kept procrastinating, just kept pushing it off. That was being a sluggard. And we have to guard against that. There's all kinds of things, though, we can do to distract ourselves. We might engage in chattering, talking too much, watching too much TV, getting on YouTube, spending hours on Facebook, other social media, maybe just sitting around and staring at the wall. There's all kinds of things that we do to distract ourselves from what really needs to be done. Be on guard against procrastination. Procrastination and being a sluggard, they really go hand in hand. Lastly, the sluggard is an excuse maker. By excuse, I'm talking about lame excuses. I do believe there are legitimate excuses sometimes. But the sluggard appears to be one of those people who just always has an excuse, and the excuses are lame. Here are a couple from Proverbs. Proverbs 22:13 says, there's a lion outside, or I'll be murdered in the streets. And then Proverbs 20 verse 3 says, a sluggard does not plow in season. other words, he's just most likely implied there that it's too cold, or it's too hot, or the ground's too wet, or my oxen are too tired, or I just don't feel like it today, and on and on and on. The excuses go from the sluggard. So part of this not ever getting around to it, the sluggard always has an excuse for why he doesn't get around to it. Just never has the time to do it. Again, keep in mind, I'm not talking to people this morning who have health issues and can't get around to it. Maybe it is too hot for you to get around to it. I can certainly sympathize with that in this weather we have. But if you're healthy, we need to be careful. We're not always making some kind of excuse. Evangelist Billy Sunday, he's a guy from way back, but he defined an excuse as this. An excuse is the skin of a reason stuffed with a lie. What a way to put that. The skin of a reason stuffed with a lie. Now, if we're all honest about it, maybe some of you have no problem with being a sluggard at all. Maybe you're just a workaholic, and I've got a sermon for you later. But I would say probably most of us fight being a sluggard from time to time. Some of us may have to fight it a lot. Some of us may not have to fight it much at all. So how can we overcome our sluggard tendencies? Well, we have to look no further than Proverbs chapter 6, starting in verse 6. Let's take a look at what Solomon tells us here. He gives us some good, sound, I'm going to say, creaturely advice. Proverbs chapter 6, starting in verse 6. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. He's basically saying, when you feel like being a sluggard, go find some ants. Learn a lesson from them. I'm sure we've all been familiar with ants at one time or another. I actually had some in my car this morning. I don't know what they were after, but they were all over, crawling the windshield and everything else. And last week they were in the church kitchen all over the counter. I don't know what they after some crumbs or something. I've had a lot of experiences with ants, it seems like, in the last week. But Solomon said you can learn something from those ants. You ever notice how hard ants work? I'm amazed at how much weight a little old ant can pick up, aren't you? What if we were as strong as ants? Man, an ant can pick up something bigger than it is. I've seen them pick up everything from pieces of bread to, kernels of wheat to even a fingernail. One time I was clipping my nails and one came across my desk and grabbed the nail and started trying to haul it off. Next thing I knew, some more came up and they were going to get in on the action. So I threw another one down there. I was thinking, man, y'all must be desperate for food, all I know. Hungry. But now the point is, man, they work like crazy. And a string of these ants start to work together and do everything they can to haul the food away. They instinctively know that they need to get some food and get ready for winter. They're trying to get ready. They're planning for the future. So they teach us really how to overcome being a sluggard. So first of all, they teach us that we should be a self-starter. They do not need an overseer or a boss or somebody standing over them to get them going. They don't need that kind of a motivation. They don't need a mom or dad telling them to pick up the dirty clothes or take out the trash or mow the yard or put the dirty dishes in the sink. They don't need that. They just see that it needs to be done and then they do it. Am I talking to anybody today? See, an ant doesn't need to be told. They're just a self-starter. They see what needs to be done and they do it. Second, be a wise planner. The ant works with the future in mind. They diligently prepare for the coming winter. They plan ahead so that they are prepared for the tough times. And because they plan ahead, they have enough when the tough times hit, and the tough times are not so tough. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but it's very spiritual to plan ahead. It really is. I mean, one day there's going to be a day of reckoning where we have to give an account of ourselves. We need to think of that. But then Jesus tells us what to store our treasure in heaven. So to send it on ahead. Why? So you can enjoy it for all eternity. Is that not thinking ahead? That is the ultimate in wise planning. So be a wise planner. And third, I'm just going to say be a hard worker. There is just nothing slothful about the ant. When is the last time you saw a lazy ant dragging itself around? When's the last time you saw an ant kick back on its back with its legs crossed? You know, I've never caught an ant in the recliner in the corner backed up like this. I've seen them going all over the place, but I've never seen one kick back. I've never seen one laying around all the time. Think about that. Man, they're always on the move. They're always on the go, hauling all kinds of things. So the next time you see some ants scurrying around beneath you, rather than immediately stepping on the ant or running and getting that can of Raid, why not just pause for just a bit and consider its ways and be wise? Hi there, I'm John Wagnon, minister of New Discovery Christian Church here in Hernando, Mississippi. And I want to thank you for visiting our YouTube channel. I do hope you enjoy the sermons, and I hope the Lord builds you up through His Word as I do my best to present it to you. If you're ever in the area, feel free to drop by and check us out live and in person. Once again, thank you for checking out our YouTube channel.